Have you been dreaming of 10,000 plus sealed indictments and high-level arrests and prosecutions? If so, stick around for 20 seconds and I'll tell you why you're wasting your time. Hi there, this is your third grandfather, Philip Kirk in Nashville. For years I've been hearing and reading about the so-called 10,000 or more sealed indictments that are sitting in court clerks' offices waiting to be unsealed and arrests being made in those cases. We're going to take a short step-by-step tour of how state and federal prosecutions work, which will show you why there is not going to be any such indictments, high-profile arrests, or prosecutions. We need to first understand the words we are going to be using. There are generally two types of criminal prosecutions in America, one at the state level and another at the federal level. And yes, there are small city and municipal type arrests for minor offenses, but we're not going to be discussing those today. Since everyone in America lives in a state somewhere, they are subject to the laws of that state. And when those laws are violated, that person is subject to arrest and prosecution by the state. The prosecutor in a state is typically called a district attorney or sometimes assistant district attorney, while in the federal system they are referred to as assistant U.S. attorneys or sometimes federal prosecutors. What we need to keep in mind is that virtually all district attorneys' offices and U.S. attorneys' offices operate at near capacity, and the number of prosecutions in one year will typically not vary a great deal from the number in previous years. The state district attorneys have a more restrictive budget with which to operate than does the federal government, which seems to have an unlimited budget. Let's stop here and talk about how the procedure concerning an arrest or indictment differs in state matters versus federal matters. Most people are somewhat familiar with how their local law enforcement works and can easily picture a policeman or a sheriff's deputy cruising around looking for violations of the law. There are also serious crimes that are investigated by divisions of those law enforcement departments, such as burglary, armed robbery, drug, and so forth. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, however, or FBI, on the other hand, does not operate in such a manner. Unless they have a really good tip that the local national bank is going to be robbed, they are not patrolling bank locations. The FBI agents investigate at the instruction of the U.S. Attorney's Office, which, of course, that makes sense in that it would be a waste of time for the FBI agents to investigate a matter which the U.S. Attorney's Office has no desire to prosecute. Now, it's a little bit different in the state system. A burglary detective or an armed robbery detective can work on a case, and they're not having to get permission every day from the district attorney as to whether or not to prosecute. They're pretty much assured that if they have a halfway decent case, that the DA will prosecute the case for them. Now, prosecuting a serious crime is a complicated and lengthy matter, sometimes taking years, and requires the participation not only of law enforcement but also prosecutors' offices and courts, along with all their support personnel. Varying that number, remember we talked about that number, that's their capacity, but varying that number by, say, only 20% would cause an extreme hardship on those offices, as well as the state's budgets, although the federal government, again, seems to have an unlimited budget. What may occur, however, sometimes at both the state and federal level is that law enforcement may initiate a special widespread investigation into, so let's say, sellers of counterfeit goods, and they might call it Operation Knockoff, which would be designed to round up persons suspected of manufacturing or selling counterfeit goods. Such an operation would be very expensive for local or state law enforcement to prosecute, but not very much, say, for a federal prosecution. For the past few decades, I'm unaware of any federal prosecution ever being abandoned because there was not enough money in the budget. Just doesn't happen. Not going to happen. So, let's take a step-by-step look at a prosecution, both on the state and federal level. Okay, this is going to be a very generalized look at how a state or federal prosecution may work. First, there has to be a crime or a belief by the government that a crime has occurred. Then a suspect, and sometimes the suspects are called targets in the federal system, And typically a suspect is identified by law enforcement, whereas a target in the federal system is often identified by the U.S. Attorney's Office and not necessarily law enforcement in the beginning. So they have to find out someone that they believe is responsible for the crime. And then the District Attorney's Office and U.S. Attorney's Office, then they begin an analysis. One of their main concerns is, do we have enough evidence to convict? If you don't have that, then they're wasting their time and they've got to drop it. Then there's another analysis, and you're not going to find this in any prosecution manuals. This is sort of a subconscious analysis that goes on in every criminal prosecution, mostly in high level, not your average, everyday burglary or DUI or anything like that. But the government tries to determine whether or not this arrest or this indictment or this prosecution, whether or not it's going to interfere with another ongoing prosecution, or interfere with it in some way. And not quite so often, but they want to know if this is going to embarrass anybody up the line. And let me give you an example. Let's say, this is a hypothetical, fictional example, but let's say you have a couple of FBI agents. They are investigating what they perceive is a crime. But let's say there's not really a crime and they're doing it for a nefarious purpose, that they shouldn't be doing it. Now, keep in mind what I said earlier, that most FBI investigations are started from up above, not your rank and file on the street FBI agents. Somebody has typically ordered them to go investigate something. So what you have is you have FBI personnel up the line involved in this nefarious type investigation. And so, in fact, you may even have a member of the U.S. Attorney's Office that may have stumbled and allowed a bad investigation to take place. So if they pursue that investigation through indictment and arrest, then that's going to backfire on them. So they're going to rethink this prosecution. Now, let's say you even have a former CIA director that you think may have committed a crime. Now, more so than even this situation, you're going to have a second thought about prosecuting this fellow right here. Why? He knows everything. There's not too much that a CIA director does not know that's gone on in America. You've heard the old expression, somebody knows where the bodies are buried. He not only knows where the bodies are buried, he knows how they got there. So that's going to be a tough decision to make to ever prosecute somebody like this. Okay, after you go through that, let's say it passes all of these smell tests, then you go for the arrest or indictment. State level oftentimes starts with an arrest. Federal level often starts with an indictment, and then they arrest the person that has been indicted. And then, of course, you go to a plea agreement or a trial if that's necessary. Now, let's take the state situation. District attorneys, the main district attorneys in any state, in any county, they are prominent citizens. They hold a high level among the citizens of their county and state, and they're very jealous of that, and for good reason. Many of them are elected, and so they want to keep getting re-elected. But most DAs enjoy what I consider about a 98% plus or minus prosecution rate, successful prosecution rate. They rarely lose. Now, a successful prosecution doesn't mean that the person, the suspect, is convicted of the crime initially charged. In other words, a second-degree murder charge can easily be ramped down to manslaughter, and then a guilty plea occurs in the manslaughter case. But anyway, the DA wants to always keep his prosecution rate high. And if you ever hear a prosecutor say something like, the wheels of justice grind slowly when they're asked about whether or not a certain group or person or whatever is going to be investigated and prosecuted, pretty much you can forget that arrest or high-level indictment. Not going to happen. You've been told it's not going to happen. Now, what are some problems in getting people convicted? I want you to consider that all trials are elections. Now keep in mind, the DA is elected, and he wants to keep getting re-elected. But all trials are really elections. Think about it. You got 12 jurors assembled for a trial. State presents their case. The defense then, although it doesn't have to, puts on a case in rebuttal of that. And then when it's over, the jurors go back to the jury assembly room and they vote. They vote in that election. They're going to vote for the prosecution, or they're going to vote for the defendant. In fact, they use ballots oftentimes. And then they come back once they've reached their verdict, and the verdict's announced in court. And to give you more reason that it's sort of an election, at the end of the announcement of the verdict, the judge often asks, does any of the counsel want the jury polled? Polled. Polling place. Voting. Election. I've never heard a winning counsel ever ask for the jury to be polled. But the loser often does. And why? Because you get a chance to ask each individual juror, is that your verdict? Mr. Smith, is that your verdict? Yes. Mrs. Johnson, is that your verdict? Yes. Mr. Pachinka, is that your verdict? Yes. So on and on. So the defense, or the loser, I should say, wants to take that last shot, so that if someone felt bullied into making their decision, they might change their mind at that very last moment. Rarely happens, but it can happen. So, cutting to the chase. This is why it's hard to convict celebrities. And it's hard to convict high-level politicians. Because celebrities, people just like celebrities. You know, they look up to them, they become experts in things they're not even expert in, and then the people swoon over them. High-level politicians, keep in mind that many politicians in your county or state have family members that are working for them. They can be on the jury pool or on the jury panel. And you got to keep in mind that if they're a high-level politician, chances are 50% or more of your jury voted for them. And it's pretty much not appropriate to ask in what we call voir dire, when counsel is questioning the jury when they're first, seated in the box, to determine whether they have any biases or related to people or know any of the parties being tried. When they ask them that, it's probably not appropriate to ask, did they vote for this person? Because that would, render the secret ballot, annulled. But anyway, so half or more of your jurors may have already voted for that high-level politician. So it's very difficult to get a conviction of them. And that's why you see very few. In addition to this right here also. Sometimes these people know a lot of information that might embarrass people. Okay. Again, that was a very generalized explanation of how state and federal prosecutions work. Now, if you're dreaming about 10,000 plus sealed indictments and arrests of high-level people, forget it. I suggest you spend your time dreaming of more attainable goals, such as winning the lottery, curing cancer, and establishing world peace. Thank you for watching this video, and please, if you will, subscribe. I don't have many subscribers, and hit the like button if you got anything out of this. I appreciate it. Thank you again for watching this.